Welcome to our Friday, March 25th edition of Golden Black Live. Joined here by Brian Newbert. This is the Sweet 16 edition because in a matter of 5 hours, Purdue will be taking on the St. Peter's Peacocks in the regional semifinal at Wells Fargo Arena, of which Brian will be there, and you'll be able to follow all his work on goldenblack.com. I want to thank our sponsors, Triple X, on the hill, but on the level of Purdue tradition since 1929. State Farm agent Trent Johnson. Trent's birthday is tomorrow, and we appreciate him. And of course, Hilton Garden Inn, when tomorrow's a big day, State HGI tonight. All right, Brian, we're getting to the part of this program where all the talk needs to come to an end, and Purdue will face St. Peter's tonight. A game that on paper, Purdue should have the upper hand, but it's going to be an interesting, they all are when I get to this point. I know you've talked about if Purdue can keep its head screwed on, it should be able to prevail tonight, but it is the NCAA tournament and some crazy things have been happening.
Yeah, I mean, I've said before, as long as Purdue takes care of the basketball, I think they can beat anybody in the country. And I think that the way that they're defending right now has made them a very different team than the team people tend to perceive them as, the team that they were early in the season. And, I think that they're in a good spot, but everybody who's reached this weekend is in a good spot too. So it's not like being in a good place really promises or assures you of anything. I think St. Peter's obviously has captured lightning in a bottle here.
Yeah.
But there also comes a point in time where, the magic kind of rubs off too. And, or I should say wears off. And, it's been a long week for St. Peter's, drawing all the media attention they've drawn. Obviously Shaheen Holloway has some Seton Hall things going on. I'm not necessarily saying they've been distracted, but I'm saying that they went back to their campus. They got patted on the back all week. They dealt with a lot of stuff that they're not used to dealing with. And, sometimes that turns Cinderella into a pumpkin. On top of the sheer reality setting in of the matchups that always matter in the NCAA tournament. And as I said last night, the momentum St. Peter's has doesn't make Zach Edey any smaller. It doesn't make Jaden Ivey any slower. And it doesn't make Purdue any less of a team than Purdue has been through 2 NCAA tournament games and through the majority of this season. I think Purdue's done mostly everything right in the NCAA tournament thus far. And if they can just make a couple more threes, especially in first halves, I think that I don't think there's anything they're not capable of here in the NCAA tournament, especially tonight against St. Peter's.
We're down to 12 teams last night, now down to just one number 1 seed, Kansas, as of course Gonzaga got beat last night, as did Arizona. Arizona got throttled by Houston, really, for the most part. And yet, of course, Villanova bests Michigan as well. And Duke gets through against Texas Tech in what was a grinder game. Good 3-point shooting is a common thread, obviously, in these types of games. Houston shot it very well last night. Certainly, Arkansas muscled its ways to its win over Gonzaga. But that common thread of you just not just showing up, but playing well, shooting the ball well is an important thing. But Purdue hasn't shot it all that well yet in the tournament, but has a chance to. And I guess we're kind of pointing at Sasha Stefanovic and seeing him get untracked. My point is, shooting helps. If you can make some shots, it can really change the dynamic as you head into this weekend, no matter who you're playing.
Well, this has been one of the most open college basketball seasons I think I can remember, as evidenced by the game of hot potato. Everybody was playing with the number 1 ranking all year long.
Yeah.
But I also think this is the most randomized championship event in sports, not just college sports, because it's not a best of 7. It's just a series of one-off competitions between very combustible individuals. And I think the way the game has gone in terms of leaning toward the 3-pointer more has made it even more random, because it's like running into the wrong pitcher in the postseason in baseball. If you just catch somebody when they're hot, The difference being in baseball, it's a best of 5, it's a best of 7. In this case, somebody comes out and makes 10 threes against you completely at random. You're done. It's like being way better than, the 1990s Atlanta Braves in baseball. But then having to go against Maddox, Glavine, Steve Avery, John Smoltz, it's not equitable in terms of what you were during the regular season versus what you now are in the postseason because of those matchups, because of the randomization of, shooting in basketball, which typically can be all over the place. Even if you're really good at it and really consistent at it, it's always hanging over your head that you might have that game where you're not good at it. Purdue hasn't shot the ball great in the NCAA tournament. They've made all the big ones to their credit. But obviously that's centralized in one guy in terms of Sasha Stefanovic. That being said, Eric Hunter was also 1 of 5 too against Texas, made a really big one.
Yes, he did.
But by and large, the guys who've been making shots for Purdue have been some of your secondary guys. Jaden Ivey, Caleb First, Ethan Morton are the guys who made the biggest shots against Texas. But it's not just about Purdue not making shots. It's about what your opponent's capable of doing. And what's to say this Doug Edert kid from St. Peter's, the second most prominent Bergen Catholic alumnus in the Wells Fargo Center tonight.
I know that.
What's to say that guy, can't make look at Purdue's season. I mean, you lost on a 3 just inside half court. You lost on a bank shot. Nobody knows more about the randomization of college basketball via the 3-pointer than Purdue does. I mean, what's to say that Purdue can't do a good job on Doug Edert, and he can make 5 or 6 threes anyway. And then it comes down to the last couple minutes or whatever, and crazy stuff happens. Who knows? Go ask Kentucky, As I've said over and over again, if it can happen at Kentucky, it can happen to anyone, because they are the bluest of the blue bloods. They are the definition of college basketball royalty. And if it can happen to them, it can happen to anybody.
Yeah. Yes, Rob Finney, I would even argue, even though I don't know if you can call his play against Purdue, it was pretty random.
That was randomization, because
it certainly was. He had his best game of his college career against Purdue.
Well, he had his best shooting game of his college career, and that speaks to the randomization of all of this. Is go back years ago to Marcus Green making all those threes against Michigan. It's just sometimes you get hit with a curveball and it blows everything up.
Yeah, Matt Painter's first win against a ranked team, and not a very good, I think a 9-win Purdue team. And Marcus Green was lighting them up that day. I remember that one well. You look at Purdue, and obviously that huge size advantage you've talked about. Zach Edey is not going to shrink between now and game time. And Travion Williams, again, it's a constant refrain about taking care of the basketball, just doing what you have to do. You're going to be in maybe a little bit of a loud environment, I guess. Though you have to think that the North Carolina and UCLA folks won't show up till about halftime anyway. So at least around the court, it may not be as loud, but there are going to be a lot of people rooting for St. Peter's. Purdue's pretty mature. I mean, shouldn't that matter much? And how much, if you had to pick, would it be making your free throws or not turning the ball over or hitting threes? Which of those 3 things? What does Purdue have to? Is it still come back to taking care of the basketball?
It's always turnovers. It's always turnovers. I mean, it's the single most important thing for Purdue. I mean, when you just look at their body of work this season, it's not hard to figure out what the common denominator is when they get beat. It's always turnovers. I think that it will be interesting today to see the poise angle of this, because Purdue has experience in these situations. Yeah. St. Peter's has no experience in anything anywhere near this level of college basketball. People are saying that there's going to be a lot of St. Peter's fans there. That might be. I mean, I'm from New Jersey. We are a very provincial people.
Yeah.
I'm sure that lots of New Jerseyans, lots of casual New Jerseyans have jumped on the bandwagon. But they have 33,000 living alumni. If every one of them showed up, yeah, perhaps the Wells Fargo Center would be loaded with St. Peter's Peacocks. But I wouldn't anticipate there being more than a couple thousand people there for St. Peter's. Whereas Purdue, I think people are underselling Purdue here. Purdue people always turn out for these things. There's tons of Purdue people out east, as you well know, in Philadelphia. There's tons of Purdue people out here, and they show up better, in my opinion. They show up more forcefully on the coasts than they do in Indianapolis, because I can go into a whole spiel about why that is, but Purdue people graduate with their pharmacy degrees, their engineering degrees, and they move to the coasts, and they never get to see Purdue basketball play. Exactly so when Purdue plays in Connecticut, or when Purdue plays in Maui, that's the access people have to Purdue basketball. And the fact that those are always big games, I think, kind of brings people out in full force. So I would anticipate there being a relatively decent Purdue crowd there tonight too. But also, it's like people saying that, oh my God, Purdue's going to buckle because there's 6,000 St. Peter's fans there. Well, they've never seen a game played in Bloomington or East Lansing. I mean, it's like, if Purdue can't play in front of 7,000 St. Peter's fans on a neutral floor, then they would have lost every Big Ten road game they've ever played. That's just not reality. I mean, that could help St. Peter's to a certain extent because, I think confidence is a big deal. And their confidence should be booming right now. But, confidence can be fleeting, and walking out on the floor with Zach Edey can, sometimes probably hurt that confidence.
Yeah, I think, and you're right. I think one thing that happens tonight, if in the fourth quarter, the last 10 minutes of the game, so to speak, it's close, all of a sudden the arena gets behind the underdog. I get that, but you're right. Purdue's seen more hostile environments than it will see tonight at the Wells Fargo Center. So, looking at anything else from one thing that seems to happen in these tournaments sometimes is guys at the proverbial lightning bolt guy, somebody that comes a little bit out of nowhere to make shots. Ethan Morton, to some extent, did that. He made two huge ones against Texas, and of course Caleb Furst. I keep thinking about Isaiah Thompson, and I don't know why. I don't know if it's a dream thing or what it is. I know Isaiah Thompson only played 4 minutes against Texas, but my point is, sometimes it does take that to get you over the hump. Maybe not tonight, but maybe over the weekend for Purdue, to somebody that's a little bit quiet. Maybe it's as simple as Sasha Stefanovic, but you need that extra person to get it done. Purdue's got a lot of weapons when you stop and look at it. 10 guys that can be somewhat interchangeable. Huge advantage for Purdue, do you think, as far as its opportunity to get through this weekend?
Well, I think Eric Hunter has largely been that guy too this season.
No question.
He essentially replaced what Isaiah Thompson was giving you early in the season, when Thompson was making like 50% of his threes. And that's been huge for Purdue because that was an enormous avenue of offense for this team, to have a guy who makes shots alongside Jaden Ivey, alongside the big guys. Had Eric Hunter not stepped up his shooting, Purdue would have experienced a significant void when Isaiah Thompson kind of stopped producing, basically.
Yeah.
I don't know what's gone on with Isaiah Thompson here lately. He's obviously not been the same player. He doesn't seem terribly confident to me. Obviously, he's not getting very many shots. I think part of that is the fact that he's the victim of his own success, and he's also the victim of Big Ten scouting, where they just realized, hey, just don't let him shoot. And he's not all that complicated a matchup to take away when you absolutely prioritize that. Now that probably opens up a little bit more for Jaden Ivey and the big guys, but still, if there's one guy out there you just cannot let shoot, that's not always the most difficult thing when it's basically a spot up deal and not something you're running really intricate offense for like you do for Sasha Stefanovic. But the guy here is Stefanovic. Obviously, it's he's been a great shooter through his Purdue career. He's in a bit of a swoon here. 2 for 12 in the NCAA tournament, 5 of 29 in the postseason. I think it's just an ill-timed slump. I don't think there's any more to it than that. I think his hand is fine. He is a more emotional guy than I think people recognize. I think he's hard on himself sometimes when he's not making shots or whatever. And psychologically, I'd assume he's in a good place, but it's just really important that he be able to turn things around a little bit and just be. I mean, he doesn't have to shoot 50%. He doesn't have to shoot 45%. He just needs to, make 1 out of 3 or 1 out of 4 even, and then I think Purdue would be much better off for it and have a little bit more margin for error than they've had here. They had versus Texas at least.
All right, last question in the segment. UCLA and North Carolina, should Purdue get through? That's who the Boilermakers will face on Sunday. Any preference? I mean, you've seen North Carolina up close and personal. Does it really matter? I mean, and if you're watching this game, which you won't have a lot of time to watch UCLA, North Carolina, because you'll be busy digesting Purdue's game against St. Peter's, but does it matter at all? And we can talk about games that Purdue's not paying any attention to just yet until it gets the win over St. Peter's. But what do you think about that matchup?
I personally, and I think a lot of people would disagree with me, but I'd prefer, from a matchups perspective, I'd prefer Carolina, just because you have a track record of success against them. I know they're hot right now, but Purdue's guarding now. Purdue's playing defense now. And, they weren't back in November. They just outscored them back in November. And I think they match up really well with Bacot. I think Brady Manick can be a problem, but he wasn't so big a problem in Connecticut that Purdue couldn't handle them. Dawson Garcia was the guy who killed them in Connecticut. He's not playing, I don't think.
Yeah.
So I would probably, I know that Carolina is defending better than they were, but they still wouldn't scare me defensively. And I think the thing you really want to stay away from, if you have your choice, is those teams that really, really make things difficult offensively, because those are the games where if you don't get the foul calls and if you don't make threes, that's when things can get really difficult on you. And I think UCLA is much more that team than UNC is. So I would probably, if I'm Purdue and I had to pick, I would probably pick North Carolina.
Yeah, interesting. And I think it's going to be it'll be a good problem to have if you're a Purdue fan and Purdue can get to Sunday and the Elite Eight. All right, Brian.
You also have a relatively inexperienced coaching situation at North Carolina too. That being said, they won at Duke in Krzyzewski's last game at Duke. They won the ACC tournament, I think, didn't they?
No, Virginia Tech won the ACC.
Virginia Tech won the ACC tournament. They beat Baylor, albeit in the face of one of the worst meltdowns I've ever seen. So I would probably choose North Carolina if I had to choose. But at this stage of the game, I don't know if there's ever like an optimal team.
Yeah.
Because they're all good and they're all hot typically.
Yeah, it's funny because you watch the games even last night and you see the number 1 seeds go down. And I don't know if I like playing if I'm Purdue having to deal with Arkansas or Duke in a situation where Duke is right now. But again, that's next week's problem if Purdue can get there. So, Brian, thanks again for your time.
Long way to go to that.
What's that?
Long way to go to that.
No question. So, all right, we'll be back. Segment 2. Rob Hummel will join us. Mike Steele in segment 3 will be talking about this game tonight. A lot of different analysis. So I think Rob Hummel will be in Chicago tonight doing radio for Westwood One, but he's been watching the tournament, obviously, in his alma mater as well. So thanks to our sponsors, XXX, Hilton Garden Inn, and State Farm. And Brian, will watch for your stuff tonight at goldenblack.com. All right, we'll be back in 2 minutes on Gold and Black Live.